wanted to do an analysis of the Beer Bible Consortium's debate that they had last week on the topic of, is God the source of all that is good? And that was a debate between John Lepp and Aron Ra. And I wanted to have this discussion with a good friend of mine, Braden, who, Braden, do you want to introduce yourself? Because I know you have a background in debate, and just kind of there and say all that stuff.
Yeah, I'm Braden Anderton. I am just out of college, 22 years old. I've been a Christian for about 5 or 6 years, and I lean towards a Reformed Calvinistic understanding of the Christian faith. That flavor, if there's 32 flavors, I'm that flavor. Yeah, I have a small background in debate. I was the president of the OSU Socratic Club, Oregon State University Socratic Club, for 2 years. And there I didn't debate, but I arranged for debates because I'm passionate about it. I think it's a wonderful way to watch two different opposing sides come and discuss ideas. Nobody can monologue, and nobody can just go on and on without having their statements and assumptions challenged. And I myself have been in 2 debates, one on the problem of evil and the other on can God be proven. If you want, you can find those on the OSU Socratic Club Facebook page, ORST Socratic Club on YouTube. We have a channel, and you can find that there. And I hope to do more. Debate is I think very valuable, and I hope that I'm okay at it. So yeah, that's me.
Appreciate that, man. So when we go ahead and get started on this in terms of talking about our thoughts on this debate and what we thought. So what did you generally think overall of this debate? What was your viewpoint on that?
Yeah, I think it would be. I think it's a little disappointing. First off, and it's not all negative. My review isn't all negative, but it was a little disappointing at times. It was kind of like watching elementary school, like soccer, where you're going, well, this is not very good from both sides. This was not the MLS of debates on morality and God. Not that the MLS is the best. I'm speaking to a soccer fan here. So
no, I'm Premier League all the way, but I will excuse this faux pas just this once.
I'm an American, please forgive me. And so this was not the highest standard of debate, but I think in addressing both sides, we can have really great opportunity to clarify a lot. And so I look forward to doing that with you. What did you think, Brent? What do you think?
What I remember as well is this was the first formal debate, the first formal live debate for both of these participants. I don't know about John because I don't know much of his background, but Aron Ra obviously has his YouTube channel, has been an advocate of evolution, spoken a lot, given a lot of lectures, that kind of thing. So I mean, he's practiced in public speaking, but this is both of them's first formal live debate. So I think we have to, maybe it wasn't the best debate, but I think the good thing is both of these guys can go away, learn from this, and maybe come back stronger for the next debate. I thought it was interesting about the soccer thing. One of the guys that I spoke to at the event after it finished had basically made the analogy saying that he felt it was very much like a tennis match played between a football player and a golf player. So it's like these two guys from different approaches trying to play a sport neither of them had played and coming in. So that was kind of funny that you were like, it's kind of like elementary soccer. Like there's some grasp of the basics, but it doesn't seem, very in. Overall, I think with you, I was like a little disappointed in the quality, and I think part of that is because not just the general level, but it was quite clear that I think Aron Ra handily had this debate. John, I think, kind of came a little underprepared. And so when you're a Christian, you come in and you see your guy get beat on so badly and well done. It's kind of, it takes a little heart out of you, because you're like, you go to these debates, and as much as you try to be fair and want to go with an open mind, you do want to champion your side a little. You want your guy to put in at least a good performance, even if the debate isn't convincing.
Yeah, certainly. And I found that as well. John, I think it seems to me there's people who write really well, and there's people who debate really well, and some people do both. I'm not a great thinker. I don't have a blog for that reason, but I can think mildly quickly and articulate things somewhat well. So I think debate is more my job. And I think John, maybe he might be better writing. He's written a book that was really successful. I don't remember what that was, but on the interplay between science and faith, and it was really well selling. So maybe that's his background. But what I think you could tell is he did know areas to touch on. He got at the is-ought problem well, or no, he got at it. He articulated it so poorly, and so you can tell he's intelligent and competent, but he just wasn't getting across the audience, and that was disappointing to see.
Yeah, and I think I think we'll start going into John particularly start doing the critical analysis there, but I don't want to dwell too much on it. But I think that was probably my big takeaway from John's presentation. Was it was a really great presentation, and like you said, really touched on the ideas of subjective morality, the problems with coming up with an idea of goodness outside of that, from either an evolutionary or just it's a property of the universe kind of aspect. And it was really great, but it was aimed at like a room full of philosophy grads. And I think that was the major problem. Was I think he completely misunderstood the audience this was aimed at. And I think even if you want to aim there and you think like there's going to be a lot of people with that level in there, aiming it a little lower and a little lower understanding, everybody in the room is going to get it, and you're also going to catch people who maybe aren't up to speed on some of the areas. So I think that was probably like my big criticism of it. Was it was a really good presentation, just aimed way too high.
Certainly. Do you have any timestamps you want? I don't have specific timestamps as much as I would like, because most of them. What was that?
No, I just have notes. I wrote down some of the things you were saying, and you brought up the is-all problem. And I think brought up as the is-all problem, a lot of people are familiar with it, especially if you're into the debate scene and debates. Like that idea has come up a lot. He said went at it from the angle of the the fact-value distinction, or bridging the fact-value gap and things like that. I'm not entirely sure everybody understands those are the same problem, or that he wasn't talking about something else completely. Because he brought it up a couple of times with Aron in the cross analysis and later, and I know that Aron, has to be familiar with Is All by Hume, and he hangs around with Matt Dillahunty. He's seen a lot of Matt Dillahunty's presentations, so he knows what he's talking about. So either he was playing dumb, which I don't think of him. I don't think Aron Ra is that kind of guy. So I think there was that idea of when he's pushing him in cross-examination, saying, "Well, you haven't bridged the fact-value gap, fact-value distinction." Aron's like, I don't know what you're banging on about, mate.
Yeah, certainly, and it seemed a little bit like that. I think Aron is a good debater. Aron is a good debater. He saw that John was not presenting that problem very clearly, and forced him to present it in a more clear fashion, and he really didn't. But yeah, the fact value distinction of like, okay, so you've said that action X produces suffering in person Y. So then the question becomes, why does that matter? Why is that bad? And the reason is because humans are valuable. And if valuable, they deserve to be cared for, or to not suffer unnecessarily or unrightly. So now, if all you believe is that exists as a natural world, where does our value and dignity as human beings come from? Why are we valuable? And if all there is physical matter, then you don't have a basis. You don't have the justification for it. And that's what this debate was really about. What worldview can account for human dignity and value, and from there everything else comes. And I think that was missed a little bit in this debate. It became a debate on does God exist, and then let's judge him, when it wasn't about whether God exists or not, and I don't think Ra had a basis to judge God.
No, but and I'll get into that when we start talking about Aron's response. But I did think that was a really great move on his part, because, like you said, it shifted the entire dynamic of the conversation, put it down to a central premise that he knew that couldn't be defended by John or he hadn't come to prepare, to deal with. And so I thought it was really great. I do think, however, somebody who was a little more seasoned would have been able to quite easily defend that well, why did, have you got any proofs that God exists, and been able to flip that round. So he left himself quite vulnerable, because I don't think Aron, I don't know, really thought it through in terms of like what would happen if somebody came up with a good argument. I think he felt like, well, there's no empirical evidence of it, and so we're good. But those aren't the only arguments. And I think John touched a little on that in one of it. I think it was in the cross-examination where he brought up we don't have empirical evidence for the Big Bang, the primordial soup, and then he said redshift, which of course Aron just latched onto and completely dismissed it. But I thought some other things that I really liked about Lepp's approach and that he gave in his argument. I really liked how he ended it on the idea of every time you drink a good beer, it's proof of God's existence. Now, I realized that he didn't really make a great case in kind of getting up to that, but I thought, especially to the Beer Bible Consortium, where you've got a bunch of people relaxed drinking beer, there was a really great way of kind of like wrapping up that whole argument and bringing that home. Unfortunately, I don't think everybody else was there on that journey to get to that point of, well, hey, once you've established that's where good comes from, then every good beer is a proof of God's existence. But I am absolutely stealing that line.
Yeah, seriously, right? That's really good.
Was there anything else that you felt that you were impressed by, or that you thought was strong in Lepp's approach?
Yeah, I really appreciated both. I appreciated both Aron and John sticking through the question section. I couldn't, but man, the question section, they continued to have great discussion all the way through, which after 2 hours is not easy, and that went 2 hours and 15 minutes. So I thought that was really neat, and I really hope to see more of Aron and hopefully more of John in the future, because I think they can both be very good in their fields and contribute to the discussion well if they both, John especially, if he gets better at public speaking and presenting himself. I think that they could be good. I haven't been able to review my notes from 12 p.m. last night, but yeah, there was. I thought overall it wasn't terrible. Could have been better.
No, and I do think there's, again, kind of go back, and I don't want to pick on this too much, but there were a couple of, I think, like really kind of really bad areas though. I felt that like these were takeaways to learn, not just in terms of knowing how to present and having that kind of casual style getting up there. Aron was much more relaxed in giving his presentation. But I think the thing that really got me was the very first question that was posed to Lepp was a girl who got up and asked about, he'd said in his talk about how values have to be prescriptive and not descriptive, like you were talking about right there. It's not enough to just be able to describe a situation and say, oh, this produces well-being, this produces suffering. But values have to be prescriptive in order to tell us what we should do, right? It has to tell us, oh, you should do this act or not. When you're faced with two choices, left or right, which one is the better choice to do? And she got up and she said, well, I don't believe that values do need to be prescriptive. I think they're descriptive. Where do you get this idea that values are prescriptive? And I thought that was like an easy slam dunk of, well, look, if you want to be able to know in any given situation what the moral or ethical choice is, your value has to be prescriptive in that it urges you towards an action. Mm-hmm. His answer was, well, I got it from some atheist, some famous atheist, and I can't remember the name of the guy he did pull out. He's like, no, it's not that guy. He's an atheist, and he's an atheist at Oxford, and, if it's good enough for an atheist atheist professor at Oxford, I thought it was good enough for me. And I was horrified that you would come to a debate, present a quote or an argument from somebody, not be clear on who the person was, right? Especially when, he was walking around with like 5 pages of notes of a printout, like he had his essay printed out as he was given the speech. But then not to be able to understand that argument and to back it up, to be like, oh, well, some good dude just said it, so I'm going to present it. I was like, that's man, that's pretty bad. I mean, and it may have been just the pressure of the moment, because I know that when you're in those situations that people ask you questions, your mind's not thinking terribly clear. You don't necessarily have everything as mapped out as clearly as you do, like me and you just talking right now. There's no pressure to come up with a quick answer and have those answers, and so those facts may be in your brain. You just may not be able to access them at that point. So, I'll give him a pass on maybe he did have that all there, but just kind of froze, if you will, in the moment. But man, I was that was where I really cringed.
Yeah, and my big thing is distance. So we have to apply consistent standards in epistemology and in ethics and ethical reasoning, and then in how we come to metaphysical truths. What's consistent with our metaphysic, or how we think the world is. So if we believe that God exists and Jesus rose from the dead, what's the natural conclusion of that for us? And if we say an Oxford professor said it, therefore I think it holds, I think it's good enough for me, I'm sure John doesn't just pick up whatever an Oxford professor says uncritically and then says, well, that's my worldview now because an Oxford. But if to articulate it that way, man, it shows if you were consistent with it, he would be I think he'd be, first off, in all kinds of contradictions, but second, I don't think it would be consistent with his Christian profession of faith. He even talked about earlier saying, well, we're not arguing here we're not here to decide on truth via, consensus, but rather actual arguments. And I thought, oh man, well, that's what you've kind of just done here. Is the authority is now an Oxford professor and not the argument itself. But yeah, that was kind of a bummer. What's fun in those kind of situations is to say, well, what does it look like to have a purely descriptive value statement? What does that mean? What does it look like? And is that actual morality? And a descriptive value, I don't know what that would be. I have no idea what that would be. Morality is prescriptive. It says you ought to. There is a moral command, a demand on your action here.
Yeah, and absolutely. There was also a lot of mischoices where Aron came back, and we'll talk about this as we go through the Aron section, but where he would say something and John would just completely leave it unchallenged. I felt, we'll just go straight into the Aron section. I think we're done with John, because there's so much I want to talk about on this, and there's a lot of stuff that I just felt didn't happen, a lot of conversation that didn't happen, and this is why I wanted to get your input on this, was because I thought Aron's approach was really good in terms of debating style, in terms of really making it difficult for John. And so that I wanted to get your feedback on that. Like, okay, if you're in this situation now, ignoring the level of argument that was presented by John and whether it was effective or not with the audience, you're in this position where you're up against Aron. Like, how do you bring it back? So we'll get into his stuff now. So, man, there was very little that I really liked about Aron, other than it was kind of like a more style thing, because the substance of the argument just was, to be blunt, horrific. It was such a straw manning. There was so much that he threw out there, and almost everything he said was easily objectionable. For somebody who, and I talk about this, Aron's somebody who's really promoted science, loves the scientific method, really loves empiricism, thinks that peer review is important and there's a good and just way of getting to truth. And for somebody to have that attitude and present what he presented, which was almost virtually opinion, was really tough to get through. So yeah, I struggled with kind of finding, what in terms of his argument was really good, other than his presentation style. I will say though, I thought it was really neat how, in presenting his definition of good, which he said was an emergent social development, just adding that, basically societies come together, decide what's good and what works for them, and then that's it. He'd later argue that, he had provided a subjective definition of good, but obviously the first thing you can raise is, well, any given society comes up with different values for good. And what happens when those two societies clash and war over different ideologies? Who's the right one? Who's the more good? But he just blew through it. I mean, that was his first opening 30 minutes, I think, were just attacks on Christianity generally. And it was only like I said, about halfway through his presentation that he actually gave like, oh well, here's how I explain good, and he blew through them in like a sentence, and either, like I said, either he didn't understand John's presentation, or just kind of played dumb and just sneaked it through. But like his whole definition of good just basically refuted John and was against what John had said in terms of evolutionary and naturalistic development of good. And he didn't deal with any of the objections, just basically went, here's my definition of good, he agrees, and then boom, straight off onto, hey, all the rest of the stuff that he went into. So I did think that was kind of good in a sense of debate style, in that he didn't even deal with his opponent's arguments, just basically stated that this was okay and this was cool, and just ran through it. And obviously John wasn't able to adequately challenge that. How about yourself? What did you think was good about Aron's presentation?
Yeah, no, seriously, you're right. Seriously, you're right. It's like I'm actually getting a pretty gnarly echo. Maybe that's better. It's gone now. Yeah, seriously. What I was thinking about is the fact that I really, it was peculiar to me in this way. So I think Aron clung to assumptions that we as human beings innately have, which is that humans have value, as I talked a little bit about earlier. And he clung to that, of course, with which if it goes unchallenged, the audience is going to agree with. Most people will agree, yeah, of course humans have dignity and value and shouldn't be hurt, and so on and so forth. And so he said it, stated it, clung to it, and then worked off of it. And because it never got challenged, he had a great platform, and he debated really well. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him that way, in terms of, I think he knew what he was doing. But that is the qualm is at the bottom. And I think it's so funny too, because we as Christians believe that that we're all image bearers. God has made us, and that because God has made us, intended us to exist, we have certain things about us that we can't escape. And I think one of those things is quite often believing in human dignity and value and morality. It's something that's, I think, so ingrained in us that the vast majority of people accept it without giving a second thought about it. And I think that kind of right there was a beautiful display of that in a weird kind of sucky, beautiful way, So I thought that was a very interesting point about Aron's presentation.
Not too subtle way of actually being a Christian underneath, right?
What was that?
That you're not too subtle Aron of being a Christian underneath, right? Because he values human dignity. He's got a little bit of the doctrine there. We just need to get him the rest of the way.
Right, certainly. If only worked that way.
But it's a good point of the commonality, if you will, that we have between believer, non-believer. This humanistic idea of, we do have human dignity, and for me, in my journey from atheism towards Christianity, was that fact that is just terribly unfounded. I do think, what's his name? Is it Peter Singer? I think like his ethical views are really kind of consistent as a naturalist and as an atheist, and I think there's a reason why most of us look at those kind of views that he has, in terms of disregard for animal and child life, or sorry, not disregard for animal, this high view of animal life versus human child life. And we often think, no, humans are kind of unique and that they're more valuable in that sense, whereas he happily will be one of those people who points out that at certain levels, children in their developmental stages and early stages are less aware, less conscious, and less deserving of dignity than certain animals, which are infinitely higher functioning than kids are. And I think that's consistent, but we have that problem against it, and I think that's what I had against it. So that was never dealt with, but I wouldn't expect it to, because I think that's a really self-aware and high-level naturalism that isn't on display typically among YouTube atheists, without trying to sound as crappy as that does sound. Sorry.
Well, I think I can agree with that statement and not feel too bad about agreeing about that statement about YouTube atheists, when many of my secular atheist friends that I have, like personally, will say things like, yeah, I don't have any, there's no YouTube atheists I actually particularly like. And those are, those friends are, I respect them a lot, very much respect them intellectually.
Yeah,
because there is a lot of internet atheism. That's just, what were you saying?
I said, yeah, you're right. Anybody who is on YouTube video is an idiot. That includes us too, right?
I guess. Yeah, we're internet Christians. Does that mean we have the same kind of thing going on? I don't know. You know what I really want to talk about is they had a lot of discussion on faith. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember that. I made notes of it, and I actually just today had posted on Aron's blog because there was a whole bunch of comments, and man, John ended up going on that Aron's blog and kind of going back and forth. And I'll be honest, I didn't read most of those comments because no matter how good those comments are, that just seems like a bad move. Like, I finished the debate, so now I'm going to go onto your blog and kind of carry on the debate. But Aron had made that point about faith, and he's got a much more detailed overview of his view on faith, which is kind of summarized that he did in the debate. And I basically brought against it, like commented and just said, hey, look, there's some objections to that definition, which we can talk about right now. So I think he said, what was it? That faith is this idea of believing in things that aren't true. And I don't think I've got my actual quote down here somewhere. But he'd quoted Martin Luther saying that, what was it? That faith is the enemy of reason. Is that right? Is that the quote?
I think what he said there was, I think he was pulling Martin Luther way out of context, but he said something like, yeah, all the great theologians of today and of the past have said that faith is contrary or without reason. That shows no understanding with at least modern theologians. R.C. Sproul is one of my favorite theologians, and even he has said things like, no, faith is not some fideistic, intellectual endeavor. Faith is a trust. It's a trust in something. We as Christians trust in the person of Jesus Christ. And I think that that's perfectly okay. We can't escape having faith in something, trust in something. But one of his quotes about evidence is what I thought was really interesting. His definition of evidence is, I'm mildly paraphrasing and using some of the same words, but what he says, Aron said evidence is a body of objectively verifiable facts that concord, again paraphrasing, that exclusively concord with a single hypothesis. And so what I find very funny about that is that that is an impossible standard to achieve. So think about this for a moment. It is always possible that a even well-established scientific theory can later better accord with something that we haven't even thought of yet, or we don't hold as tenable. So let's think of geocentrism for a moment. Geocentrism is obviously was held to a long time ago, and there was just a common agreement. What's the word I'm looking for? It was settled. It was the sun revolves around the earth, and it makes and then later we gained more data and we understood it better, and we realized the data better fits with the other way around. The Earth revolves around the sun. And so I thought that's so interesting, because you can't have objectively verifiable facts that only accord. It's only possible that they accord with one theory, because there'll always be something that comes about later. So what he's doing is he's saying, this is the model of the universe I'm trusting in, right? It's not faith in the fideistic blind faith sense, but it is still faith on the same level that you and I would say we have faith. I thought that was interesting. What do you think? What did you think about all that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things there. Obviously, like you were talking there, there are examples of that. And I do think if you're going to say the evidence fits only one verifiable theory, then you, like you say, you run into that problem that science, first off, it's a truth claim. You're making an objective truth claim. You're saying that whatever that evidence fits has to fit one defined objective truth, which is completely anti-science. Like, anti-science does not say even our best guess of right now is the objective truth. It's kind of our best model that we have. And by golly, we'll keep improving that model step by step and adding new things to it. In terms of what you're talking about geocentrism, I think of, like, obviously we moved to a Copernican model with the heliocentricity, the sun at the center of the universe. But there were other models, like Tycho Brahe's model, who was, trying to keep to geocentrism, but working out the tweaks. And there wasn't really a good way of being able to discern between those two theories as to which was the more accurate, right? We needed to wait till we got better telescopes in 17th century, things like that, to be able to go, okay, it's this theory or it's this theory. But for that time, those two theories were held. But it also makes me think of, like, modern contemporary science. Like, even if you want to believe that, well, we held the geocentrism because of the church and it was all regressive and they were idiots and we're much smarter now. Like, right now we have general relativity and quantum mechanics, two theories that fit the evidence almost perfectly, but are completely contradictory. And there's no allowance of that kind of thing in that worldview of science. You know what? Sometimes science does go, these theories are completely contradictory. We know that these theories are wrong, if you will, in a sense that there's some kinks to work out. There's something different go on. It may be that we just have to revise one of those theories. It may be that we need a bridging theory. I can't remember what it's called now, but this idea that there's a theory that will kind of tie them together and make them both compatible. Or it may be that they're both completely wrong. We need completely new theories. It's not a case of iterating either of them. And Braden's theory of the universe comes out, and it solves every problem from quantum mechanics all the way up to general relativity. But that's what science is. Science is a best guess. And, yes, we have lots of good reasons to trust it. It works. We build our lives off it. We build TVs, planes stay in the air, all this kind of stuff. Yes, there's a lot of good reasons to trust them. But, 200 years from now or 2,000 years from now, that worldview is going to look very different. It doesn't mean that electricity is going to stop working, but there's going to be assumptions in our worldview that will look as backward and stupid as, the views that we had of the Middle Ages and Bronze Age people and things like that. Those views will get updated and changed, and we live in that, knowing that our worldview, on a scientific and empirical worldview, is as good as we can make it, and we just look for ways to improve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems to me that one of you have probably studied a little bit more in the realm of science than I have, it seems, because when you explain very briefly here, we have quantum mechanics and general relativity, and the two are in direct conflict with one another. They contradicted one another. I thought, I vaguely remember that little fact of where, tell me if this is wrong, you have basically large scale is general relativity, and then we get down into a quantum level and things kind of, that breaks down, and now our models are quantum. The quantum mechanics and quantum theory, and somehow they correspond, but we don't really know. Is that kind of right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Somehow reality works, and we don't quite know how the two can be held together and how that works, but they do. Our lives work on it, and we don't suddenly vanish out of existence. And our best minds have been working on these various theories to unite them and bring them about. And we have a number of good theories. They have been, moving along in that sense, but we haven't figured out all those answers yet. And the other thing that, we'll kind of get is we don't have very good evidence for them. We have bits and pieces. We have observable side effects, I think, are the best way to describe it. And so what we've done is inductively reasoned, well, given this evidence, this theory could be true or this theory could be true because it would produce those kinds of evidence. The problem is you don't know that this is the only theory in town that would produce that kind of evidence. So you're always open to the idea that, oh man, this completely new theory comes out and it would produce all these same kinds of evidence, but it would better describe bits and pieces that we have. Oh, good. Let's move to that theory. And there's an element of that in science. It's not just this idea that, oh, we have a fact that then leads to theory, and then that theory is good up until that theory is falsified by some other thing else. I believe that all swans are white until the black swan comes along, and you go, well, okay, swans can be black or white until a gray swan comes along, and oh well, swans can be black. Like that idea. What also happens is you will get maybe two competing theories: swans are white, swans are blue. And there'll be some evidence that doesn't fit one of those theories, and you say, well, you see a black swan. Well, maybe swans can be on this grade of white to black, but they can't be blue. We kind of know that. So you'd still prefer the swans are white theory, even though there may be dings against it until a better theory comes along. And that's part of the scientific process, is using these theories that we know have elements that can't be true about them objectively, but it's the best fit model we have until somebody comes along with a better model. And again, that's not in there, but I find that the empiricism is kind of used as this, well, this fact leads to this truth, leads to this go. But I mean, there's so much of our worldviews, and that even science itself is based on, that we just don't have verifiable facts for. We just wing it and go with it. Yeah, and we have so many assumptions at the bottom that we take into how we do science, and that was touched on a little bit here with induction. I think that might be a little tangential. I think when they started getting into the problem of induction, I think that was it was entirely tangential to the debate. Although, again, I think that was a good display of John Lepp kind of knows what he's talking about. He understands that the problem of induction is an issue, but it's neither here nor there for the debate. So, that was... This kind of gets into the meat of what I wanted to talk to you about, because, I mean, this was just one of many kind of things he threw out. Like we talked about the faith aspect. Faith is the Mark Twain definition of, believing what isn't so, which is, again, wrong. If you look at, epistemology and study of epistemology and religion, of philosophy of religion, they would completely disagree with it. Not only, like you said, modern theologians disagree with it. The very first early Christians, their works in Latin, and that's what I posted about it on his blog. Because if you go back to the Latin, there's a distinction between faith as trust and faith as belief, and one of those is really predominant in Christian writings, and one of them is almost absent. So that kind of gives you a clue that it's not just kind of like a dishonest intellectual move by the Christian to kind of like, no, it means this instead. Like, no, it's just not the way it was used. He kind of said that he quoted Steven Pinker's book, Better Angels of Our Nature, as well, talking about how violence is on the decline, wars are on the decline. Again, that's another one that's been heavily debated. Pinker's use of his data in there and whether that's true. The 20th century was, by some accounts, one of the most bloody in our entire history. The idea that every falsifiable claim in the Bible has been proven true. The use of scripture, I thought was awesome as well. The Psalms 14 was it? There is no good among them, not one. Right after that, it talks about how God looked across all of humankind and found nobody good, not even one, not just the atheists. So, I mean, like, there was a ton of things there that Aron Ra said that were easily, like, you could go back and go point them. My big problem with it is he said so much of this, right? And we just talked a little there about the nature of scientific method and empiricism and what that really means. that's a 20-30 minute conversation to really get into and have that kind of discussion. Each of those that I just threw out is probably a 20-30 minute conversation. So when you're up against somebody like that in a debate, what's the best use of your time in kind of coming back in rebuttal? Do you pick one or two? You can easily kind of kick the legs out under to kind of show, look, they're using faulty logic and bad reasoning because I'm going to pull this one out and go, and I can do this with all the rest. Do you try to hit on all of them, with like a brief, well, this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong? How would you approach it, Braden?
Yeah, great question. That's something I actually remember hearing that and going, this is the most frustrating form of debate. It's meaningless. It's Twitter debate. If all of your ideas, if each idea you convey can be communicated in 140 characters, it may not be meaningful, but you can convey a lot of small ideas with 140 characters, and so it's like a machine gun. And I see this often. You say, many people will say, I have 1,300 objections and ready, go, da, 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 da. And they just fire off objection after objection after claim after claim. And so then the defending them takes longer than to shoot them off, so you don't have time to attack, to defend against them all, as easy as it would be if you had time. So when in that situation, what I do is what I have done, and what I do is I point out, I say, this is totally a ridiculous style of debate. My opponent has fired off 1,300 objections, and to defend them takes more than a single iota of thought and more than to explain. And so when I can't explain them and one goes unanswered, many people will say, well, look, my opponent won the debate because, well, he didn't answer all the objections. What? That's ridiculous. So what I'm going to do is show, and I'm going to encourage you, audience members, if you want to be intellectually honest, follow up on what he has said. Follow up on it and hold him accountable. And I'll show you 3 or 4. I'll answer 3 or 4, and we can move on from there. And so I would pick, maybe if I could think of it really quickly, I would think of, I'd say, okay, this is a great example, and this kind of answers this kind of question, and this is just a false supremacy. And I'd just pick a couple and then continue to move on from there.
Do you find that gives you a lot of sympathy or empathy from the audience? Because I've seen that done in debates before, right? I think I've seen it a lot in whenever William Lane Craig kind of goes up against somebody. That's usually a common complaint of William Lane Craig is, he throws out this da 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 da, and then his opponents go, well, look, it's going to take me 3 hours to answer all of these. I don't know. And to me, yes, there's some truth in there, but it also feels like that would be an easy out, even if that wasn't the case. Like if your opponent comes up and presents 5 or 6 good points and walks you through them, there's a lot of steps in between there, and so you could easily kind of make out, well, there's 20 different arguments here, and I'm not going to answer them all. Would you say, from the debates you've seen and the 2 that you participated in, do you feel like that would be something that the audience would be open to and would kind of accept that argument? Especially, I like what you were saying there about following up. Do you find that really works as a good way of kind of highlighting that attack by the opponent and saying, look, they're being dishonest here?
Yeah, one of the things I always have to keep in mind whenever I'm talking with really anyone, just even conversation, is I can't do anything ultimately about someone's mindset. I can't. If they hate Christianity and they would rather just eat their hat than become a Christian, then I can only do so much. I can't do much. So when I'm in a debate, I'm not looking to reach every person. And it's kind of seemed what John Lepp was trying to do. He was trying to answer objection regardless of whether it was pertinent or meaningful. I would, like I said, I would say, all right, I'm going to pick a few, and because for the sake of time, and let those who actually care, who actually want to be intellectually honest, I'm going to let you go and develop the tools, develop the skill at learning to dissect these. And I think when you do that, when you learn to challenge the beliefs of both sides, you'll come to a meaningful, I think you'll come to a meaningful position, a good position. I think you'll be a Christian personally, but at least honest this
That's,
way.
that's the smart answer, right? You convert it to Christianity. So one of the things we want to talk about there on kind of sort of tensions related, there was obviously a struggle going on towards the end of the Q&A session, or I think towards the end of the cross-examination, but moving into the Q&A. It's clear that certain people were getting very frustrated and didn't like the fact that they were, had a very hostile audience. And it kind of got quite emotional. And I just want to talk a bit about that, because I felt like that was a disappointment for me as well, because, even if your arguments fail, you're still up there as a kind of advocate and representative of your viewpoint on your side. And when it kind of descends into, we'll just call it ugliness, I was a little disappointed with that, because, it's like, if you're there to uphold a worldview, like, be consistent with that worldview. Don't kind of descend into that just because your arguments aren't getting through. Did you notice that as well, or did you kind of feel the same way about that?
A little bit, yeah. I could see John getting frustrated, and he kind of capitulated to Aron's way of communicating and explaining his ideas. Yeah, that's tough. You know what's funny? I always remember this story. When I see that kind of thing, and when that happens, maybe in a conversation, I always remember this. A dear friend of mine was an atheist all the way through undergrad, and then through a series of kind of being humbled, he reconsidered, and during the process, he came to a Socratic Club debate. This was before I was part of the OSU Socratic Club, which I talked about earlier. He came to a Socratic Club debate and watched a debate on either morality or the existence of God between Dan Barker and a local Catholic priest. And the debate, he says he doesn't really remember the debate, but what he does remember is a single comment from Dan Barker to the Catholic priest, which was, "You're not a father. I'm more of a father than you," with the most condescending and arrogant term, right? Like, really just, this is cutting and unnecessary. And it was at that time that Brian thought, there's something different about this, that the Christian, and then of course the Catholic priest responded with, okay, didn't respond, just took it. And that was then Brian said, there's something different here. There's something different, and I don't know. And that really stuck with him. And so I always remember that, like, maybe I'm looking foolish to a large group of people, but there could be one person who sees it and goes, that's interesting. He doesn't respond. I mean, he's like Jesus. Jesus just, hey, I'm not going to respond. I'll close my mouth. And so, yeah.
Yeah, part of your argument, you witnessing as well, the people seeing this is how a Christian talks or debates, and this is how a Christian disagrees with somebody, it doesn't kind of get into that level of pettiness or that aggression, but it's hard. I mean, I haven't done formal debates, but I have kind of done interviews and stuff and tell to atheists, and there are times when you get pressed on something that maybe you don't know, you don't have a clear answer for, and you're getting hounded on it and pushed, and it's like, I don't know, I have an answer, it's perhaps not a great answer, and I realize it may not be completely defensible, but it's the answer I have, and I'm trying to be honest. It's not like I'm just inventing stuff to kind of get me out of a corner, where you can feel like you are a cornered animal, like your blood gets up and your aggression's out, and I definitely say it with a mindful of that we're all subject to it and we can all fall to it, but it's like, it's tough when you go to debate, because there is that element of, yes, you're there to present your best argument, but there's also a heavy element of you're also there to just witness through your presence.
Yeah, and that story I told about my friend and Augustine. Have you heard of Saint Augustine? I'm sure you have. If you're at all into theology, no matter who you are, from what stripe, you've heard of Augustine. And Augustine tells a story of his coming to faith, where he said he was, I think, a Platonist, Aristotelian. I don't remember, but he met a Christian on a beach one day, talked with him for 20 minutes or so, or I don't remember how long, but they talked for a while, and the Christian was able to give a lot of great responses, and then But one of the things that struck Augustine was also that the Christian, when he didn't know, didn't just pull things out of thin air and say, well, here's my answer. It's ad hoc. The Christian would say, I don't know. And both of those aspects, the Christian's ability to answer most of his objections, but then also willingness to say, I don't know, paired with the martyrdom and the actions of saints later in his life, is what made him say, wow, this is true. Their actions and their demeanor have what's won me over. And I'm certainly inconsistent with that a lot. I have a punchy personality. I'm okay with conflict a little bit more than I ought to be, and I'm inconsistent with my profession of faith sometimes, more than I'd like to be. And so I'm no martyr by any means, but I hope that I can kind of emulate that and be a good witness in that way, for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely tough, and I think it's something you have to develop, and obviously doing more debates is a good part of that, because then you know how to respond. And again, like you said, it's the first kind of debate for both of them, so there's going to be a little bit of that. We're murdering children downstairs. That's the screaming you can hear going on. We have a friend of ours staying with us. I think somebody's already in nap time. So one thing I did want to kind of bring up, I thought there was one big kind of topic of discussion that loomed, I think, and it loomed almost beginning of the debate, when John Lepp kind of used this as view of his idea of here's an objective moral truth that we all know to be true and recognize. And that was the idea of female genital mutilation. How quickly after he said that did you realize that the size of the hole that had been dug there?
I didn't see it at first. What do you want to express that out?
Like almost one of the first questions that he would get at the end, with the Q&A, and I thought Aron would actually go after him, and Aron didn't. But for circumcision, if you're going to argue something is completely objectively immoral like that, you best have a good answer for why it is that then God, orders that the Israelites be circumcised. Now, I do think there are good answers, and I do think that just because circumcision in itself is bad, and especially forcibly done is immoral, means that it's similar immoral when done in the context of the Israelites. And I also think that again, the Israelite circumcision was done for a particular reason, in order that it would prevent something else much worse. But John didn't have any of those answers, and just basically rolled out divine command theory, which is the idea that anything, because God is pure goodness, God is the source of all good, that anything God orders, however immoral it may seem to us, it is by right good because God orders it so. And I do think, even if that is your answer, even if that's your theology, it's a very difficult thing to argue to a room that in this particular case was predominantly non-believers. I know from my days as an atheist, if you kind of give me divine command theory, I don't care how well you can back that up, how much theology you have behind it, how much good philosophy you have behind it, I'm going to kick and scream the whole way and not really take anything that you're giving me there.
Yeah, that was I did see later the inconsistency, and I certainly see it now, and that's something I hadn't really recognized and really thought through. But there's obvious theological reasons. The circumcision is still a continued picture of the sacrificial system in a way, in that it's a picture of what Colossians says is the circumcision of the heart, that it's not like a clean, easy, fun process. It can be painful, it can be hard, and it's a picture of that in a way. I also say it has to do with God desiring to separate Israel as a nation from the surrounding nations. I think that that's a good way to make them, one, different, and two, also, it's going to sound weird, but if you're a foreign nation and you come across Israelite men, they're going to be a little strange to you in this way. But outside of that, and I don't think I wouldn't argue those completely. I'm not sure how I would go about explaining that from my perspective. those might be preliminary, but I don't think that they're entirely satisfying. But it is that's a really great thing to consider. What do you think? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, and I think that was mostly the lines that was going on with you. Is obviously part of the story is with Israel. One of the things we struggle with in terms of atheist debates is we allow too much ground in terms of, well, it's said about the Israelites, and so therefore it's an example of bad being good. But the story of the Israelites is not the story of God's super awesome, perfectly holy people. It's exactly the opposite of that, and so it always amuses me when these kind of objections get brought up, because it's like, yeah, that's the point. So circumcision is, yes, it's genital mutilation, and yes, genital mutilation generally is a bad thing. But in terms of the Israelites, you're right in that this is a sacrificial system that is meant to distinguish Israel. It's meant to mark them, but it's meant to mark them not only to other races, but to themselves, in keeping their promise to God, and that they are set apart, and as a reminder they're holy, in the same way that you might be branded or something like that. And that is why it was done. And yet you can still see that even though something as horrific and something as permanent and scarring and as very kind of extreme as this was done, that still there's those same issues of remembering who they belong to, remembering what their cause is, remember what they're doing in keeping with their walk, and so on and so forth. So I do think that that's in there, and that it needs to be understood in that kind of context, rather than it's just, oh, God said to go get circumcised because, that's fun and that's for giggles. And no, that's not why it was done. And it's also why, going forward, it's not done. And yes, I think they talked about, I think they actually mentioned on the night this idea that it's a practice that's still going on. It might have been in a conversation I had with somebody afterwards, but that it still goes on, at least here in the States, which is crazy how that is. It's not even a question. Your kid just gets circumcised. But it's not around the world. And over the years, there have been health claims that have been made about it and things like that. So there have been other reasons that have kind of muddied that water as to why people get circumcised. But originally, and at least in the biblical intent, that's based in there. And I think that's an argument to have of well, yes, God ought of it, and genital mutilation is bad, but here are the reasons why, and this is what it prevented, and this is what it still couldn't prevent, and there are other things going on there. So
yeah, and we have to. I think we have to continue to make sure we. Yeah, you're super right. And one of the further things is, I don't think there's ever a context where we just say, well, X action is bad, done, period, end of sentence, it's over, right? There's always a context. Shooting someone, I don't know what your views on pacifism are, but let's say war or shooting someone is bad unless they're trying to kill millions of people, right? At which point a self-defense could be justified. Self-defense and defense of others could be justified. And in the same way, circumcision may not be a fun thing, but if it leads to a greater good, which is, like you just talked about, the holiness of Israel, the display of a sinful nature being sloughed off, it can be called something better, something good. It can be not bad. So I think when we understand that, we continue to develop that more consistent ethic of not just good, bad, done. There's context and wisdom to be had in every situation.
Yeah, and I think that's part of why believers kind of go against that divine command theory, because it feels too much like you haven't thought about the issue and that you've just come up with the simplest answer to it, regardless of whether you actually do have good reasons and good grounds for believing it. So there's a lot of good philosophical defenses of this. I mean, I can't remember what it's called, the website that has all the philosophy on it. Can't remember whose university, Stanford University's philosophy site. I think it has all this, and it has good defenses on it. And they're great. I don't agree with them, but I think at least you can intellectually say, well, there's good arguments and there's good grounding for that. But I think, as a non-believer, you just cannot accept it, because it just feels too much like I'm reaching for the lowest hanging fruit. Well, God said it was good, so it's good. I definitely agree about the context. Personally, I do lean towards the pacifism side, but obviously I get a different problem of, well, if a guy is beating on a woman and your only choice to, save your family or whatever is to kill the guy before they kill you, well, that would be bad, but there's different reasonings for it. I'm not sold on pacifism. I'm really not sure, because I think it's one of those things of where if people came and invaded your house, you may feel very different in the moment than sat reflecting in your armchair going, well, I do think that all violence is unnecessary. Like it's very easy to kind of defend those things. Whereas in the position, I don't know. I think self-defense arguments are very strong, and I think there's a good reason for doing that. Quite horrific acts. I mean, if you look at like our narratives that we tell in movies and in stories and things like that, Taken is a great one, right? We all love the fact that he goes off and kicks ass, and gets his family back, and is this horrible man. I have no skills. I'm gonna come find you and I will kill you. Like, nobody in that theater is going, well, you know what? I really don't think that that's the best approach to the problem, because violence is just going to continue with the cycle of violence. Like, everybody's going, oh yeah, he's going to find you. So we do have this, like, well, there are times where, like, even like, because I think in that film he ties a guy to like an electrical cable and tortures him, and yes, in the movie we know it's not real, but there's an element of like, yeah, no, that guy's getting what he deserves. That's really fleshy and not Christian, but yeah, we do have
right.
There's a morality in there. There are certain justifications we have in this stuff. But that does bring up the final point I wanted to talk about, which I thought was probably the best discussion of the night that happened, and it happened between Aron Ra and one of the questioners, who kind of challenged him on that idea of that idea of good at being a social, emergent social development. When he went straight for the Godwin's law and brought up the Nazis, right? Because that's what every discussion on morality needs is the Nazis. You cannot get away from them. And he brought up that point of, well, what they thought they were doing was good. They thought they were doing the right thing. And I think Aron just hand waved it and dismissed it as like, well, they were all insane. They were all deluded. They were mentally ill. And yet we know, like, from the Nazi trials and all this kind of stuff, that like a lot of these guys were completely in their right mind. We know from science, even from the Milgram experiments, where people were invited in to do this experiment where, long story short, they were given the impression they were torturing somebody, and it was seen as how long and how much would they torture somebody under authority if just some random person told them to do it, who they didn't have to obey, who wasn't a policeman or a government figure. Even if they thought that they'd actually killed the guy, would they go through with it? And they found that disturbingly high levels of people would go through with it. So I mean, like, that's what we learned from the aftermath of the Second World War and in terms of psychology of humanity. And like Aron like either isn't aware of that, or just just pled that all away as just nonsense, and they just appealed to, well, if people have different ideas of good, then they're mentally deficient.
Yeah, that was I have an echo.
Sorry.
It's okay. I didn't watch the whole of the question series, to be honest, because it was like 12 o'clock last night, and I was going, these are not beneficial. But that sounds like, how do we? They thought what they were doing was right, and moreover, what they were doing could have led to the greatest human flourishing. I mean, I don't know if he was taking a utilitarian perspective. It kind of sounded utilitarian. Roz?
I don't think we got into that aspect of the well-being, but I think that brings up another great related point, right? Was because a lot of their ideology was on the idea of making the better human and making the perfect race and all this kind of stuff. And when you tie it into evolutionary naturalism and survival of the fittest, right? There is an argument for, hey, right now society gives you the option of aborting Down syndrome kids, and we will be at a place, either, I think we have some tests right now, but I don't think we had them when we had our kid, but being able to spot genetic markers for debilitating diseases and all this kind of stuff. This is one of the arguments for late-term abortions, is that you can see these develop through ultrasound, and if you find out that your child does have one of these like debilitating chronic diseases, they're not going to have a good quality of life, not going to have a good lifetime, to allow for late-term abortions to abort these children, so that you don't put them through that short lifespan of intense suffering. But you take that step of going back to naturalism. Well, if we're going to do all we can to promote well-being and promote the best possible society we have, there's an element of going back to the days of Rome, of leaving lesser children or kids with disabilities and things like that by the side of the road for the wolves to get. And I thought that was like kind of good because we got the beginnings of that discussion and those problems. But you know, it didn't come out till the Q&A, and it wasn't. I mean, they talked for a couple of minutes on this and went back and forth. But to me, that was like the big part of the evening and the big part of that discussion, because again, this is one of the things that I got to was well, hey, you know, if I'm really going to be consistent with that ethic, then altruism may not be the best approach to promoting greatest well-being, things like that are. And what do you do when you have a society who does say, you know what, hey, we get rid of everybody who is below average intelligence because we want to promote intelligence and do all these things. Where's the grounds for kind of saying that that's wrong? And then with natural explanations for goodness and development of society and promoting well-being, it's very difficult to come up with good reasons why you have that internal objection and why you're like, no, that's deeply wrong. All human life is valuable, not just the excellent human life, the intelligent human life, the athletes and all this kind of stuff, but disabled human life is just as valuable or equally valuable to society and important for us to support and give them the best well-being and devote resources to that.
Yeah, seriously, you bring up a great point. Where does the line, where do we draw the line, and why are you past it? Why you know, why are you on this side of the line, not the other? And why is the line drawn here? Why not draw here or here, you know? And I think that it's just that kind of it becomes very arbitrary. Intellectually, it's very arbitrary. Ethically and morally and emotionally, it's, whoa, hold on, that smells wrong. And maybe somebody can't quite put their finger on where the problem intellectually lies, but I think most people can say that smells strange. That's not quite right. There's something wrong with that, and would be very repulsed by an idea where we say, yeah, because they're a Down syndrome baby, because they're not intellectually as high, or they'll have a lot of needs, or they'll have some problems that cause them to suffer, that we should therefore put them out of their misery. Have you ever seen an unhappy Down syndrome person? They're always so happy. They live wonderful lives. I'm sure you have. I actually sure people have, but they tend to be very happy.
Say that, but again, I mean, this is one of the worldview points that I've changed on. And I'll openly admit that even up to the birth of our child, that was a discussion that was an intense discussion between myself and my wife about having the baby tested for Down syndrome, because it's a test you can do in the womb to find out whether the child has Down. And I was open to doing the test, and my wife pointed out, why are we doing the test? Because regardless of what the test results are, it doesn't change the outcome of the action that we're going to take. And I hadn't really considered that. Like I was totally fine with, and God, it sounds like such a monster, but like I was totally fine with, oh hey, the kiddo comes back with Down syndrome. Oh well, you know, like that was not something I really thought about. And it's only with, you know, I grew up with a kid at school who had Down syndrome, and that didn't, like, at no point during my childhood did I think he was, you know, in a lot of pain and suffering in his life wasn't worth living. He was different, sure, but I don't think I felt like, oh well, he deserves to be in the trash can and society on that life. And yet here I was with our own childhood life, and I had that, and so that's definitely something that I've moved on to now. Is I do feel like now that is a great contradiction that we have in society, and a great ethical problem. Forget abortions generally, like, you know, just that idea of aborting Down syndrome people is one that I don't think we lose anywhere near enough sleep that we should be losing over.
Dude, thanks for being honest. I appreciate that. That's yeah, I'm very thankful that your wife, you know, said, hey, smack some sense into you a little bit, and that you have, you know, at least one. You have what, 2 children?
Just the one.
Just one. You have one very healthy child, and I'm really thankful for that. That's really cool. I'm happy to hear your position change a little bit on that too. It's
yeah, look at that. See, Christians can change their positions.
Yeah, hey, we can, you know, and we can disagree, and yeah, And what's really great about that is if I appreciate that you understand that God has grace for poor decisions, and I've made tons as well, and we live by grace and hate our sin.
Exactly.
Yeah, dude.
Was there anything else that you felt in the debate that we haven't touched on that you wanted to bring up?
Not that I can think of. We touched on most of the points I wanted to, which was, challenging presuppositions that have gone without a basis in Ra's position. We talked about a little bit about evidence and the way that we talked about that. And we talked a bit about debate style. I think we touched on most of what I really want to touch on, which was, I think, very valuable to touch on. And so, yeah, if you don't have anything, I'll sign off, and I wish you the best of luck with that child of yours that you said was screaming.
Absolutely. So like I said, I think the next debate is next week. It's again at the doors. I believe it will also be live streamed for anybody who wants to go check it out. It's the Beer Bible Consortium, and like I said, that debate will be on, I think, did Jesus rise from the dead, between Blake Gunt and Matt Dillahunty. And hopefully, Brendan, I will have you back, and we'll talk about that and talk about how obviously Matt Dillahunty was correct, and Jesus could not absolutely have risen from the dead without we can't know that at all. Yeah.
Certainly, we will agree wholeheartedly on that, right? That's going to be fun. That'll get into some of my favorite topics, which is epistemology and how do we know what we know, and how do we understand the world. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll be good.
Yeah, and obviously predominantly it's going to be a historical debate, and so there's that question of how much can we know historically? Yes, maybe extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, but like, what's extraordinary evidence in terms of being able to prove that you did something a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 2,000 years ago? So yeah, it's going to be hopefully a really good debate, and look forward to that. So once again, Brendan, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate you watching the debate and offering your feedback, and look forward to speaking to you again, sir.
Yeah, dude, thanks for having me. I look forward to it again, man.
All right, take care.